Hey students, it's Mrs. T again. So there was a knock at the door at the end of our other video that you watched, lesson 2, part 1. And as most of you know, because you've read my announcements and emails, we are doing virtual class for everybody, even those who opted for face-to-face. We're doing virtual class right now because my father, who I've been his caregiver for the last 7 years or so during his fight with vascular dementia. Anyway, he went into hospice last week, and so I have to be available to determine a hospice schedule and interface with all of the different facets of end-of-life care that have to come with hospice when when that is established. So anyway, that knock on the door was the chaplain for the hospice service, and I just find it interesting. I mean, it's wonderful that, in my opinion, that a chaplain, comes with the hospice service that Medicare pays for. However, I am puzzled by it also, since Medicare pays for it, and the chaplain says that it is a requirement in the hospice service that a chaplain is available for the spiritual needs of end-of-life transitions. So anyway, that's what the knock on the door was. He did text to say he was on his way over, but since I was making this video with you, I didn't see that text. So anyway, so I had a meeting with him, and my dad's all taken care of, and I'm going to talk with he's going to call and check in with us again in 2 weeks. So anyhow, I'm back with you to continue this conversation that we were having. I remember that we stopped when I was talking about social class and how and why class is on an ascribed status list. It has way more to do with upbringing and what we learn in our socialization process, because what we learn, especially at an early age and especially in our households growing up, our way of life, our style of life, the resources we do or don't have, the way we do or don't handle money or get exposed to extra or limited amount of resources, these things become kind of ingrained in our attitudes, in our ideas, in our self-identity. And so social class is like a mindset that is ascribed. It's complicated. I think I told you we're going to talk about it in chapter 7. And it's really not associated all the time with your income level, which is something that we can transition. We can use that income level thing as a segue over into the achieved status conversation to finish out this lesson 2, part 2 for sociology this week. We're going to have a couple more lessons this week also, because these first 3 videos from this week are technically for Monday and Tuesday's classes, and then we'll have Wednesday, Thursday classes also for you to watch additional videos and take notes, okay? Before that reaction paper and that quiz are due. Okay, so achieved status is another type of status. So remember, status is a position in society, and every single status has a role that goes with it. So there's 3 different kinds of statuses that we're going to talk about. And so far we're talking about ascribed status, and we've pretty much got that one, a good understanding, I hope. Review the previous video if you need to. And now let's talk about achieved. So achieved, luckily, when we are talking about the word achieved in this conversation, I'm not going to tell you that there's a new and special definition that you have to learn or relearn because, we're in sociology class. I know I've had to do that with you before, like the sociological imagination. The word imagination here, do not confuse it for referring to make-believe situations. The imagination here in that phrase, the sociological imagination, refers to your ability to think, refers to your ability to make connections, informed connections about macro-scale social forces and micro-scale life experiences, and how the gap is bridged between those two things. And so the imagination, I told you, don't think of make-believe, think of your ability to understand, your ability to make connections. So there have been a couple times where I've told you to relearn a word or define it in a new way because of sociology. We don't have to with the word achieved. Achieved just means that you have earned something, okay? So achieved status is a position that you've gotten through effort. You went through some sort of effort to get that position. Now, an achieved status is something that you have earned. And when we think of an achievement, we usually associate that with a positive thing. And that's great. I like optimism. However, we can also achieve statuses that are not desirable according to society or according to ourselves. For instance, a convicted felon is an achieved status, right? You, through your effort, did this thing and found guilty, and you are a convicted felon, for instance, or ex-con once you get out, right? So these are examples of achieved statuses. I mentioned those first off because if you're an optimist like me, you probably are thinking like, well, I'm a student now, and that's an achieved status because I have to work to make progress and continue in my career. And at the end of student, I'm going to transition into graduate, and that's going to be an achievement. And at the end of graduate, I'm going to start applying for the jobs that I want and fix my resume to make sure that everybody knows how I'm qualified, and then I'm going to get my job and I'll be employee, and that is achieved status. And yes, all of those are examples also. However, anything that you get through effort, some kind of behavior on your part, whether you think of that status as desirable or undesirable, it's considered an achieved status. Okay, so some of the examples, so you get it through effort on your part, and some of the ones that I just went through, well, student, for instance, is an achieved status. Graduate is an achieved status, as I mentioned a minute ago. But there are three achieved statuses in particular that I need you to like put in boldface, italics, underline, and highlight in every color when you're writing this in your notes, because these three achieved statuses are going to be, I'm going to repeat these so many times between now and the end of the semester that you are just going to have to, you know, just make a screaming noise or something to not hear them in your consciousness when I'm not around. So these achieved statuses are so important for our understanding of class and for our understanding of social stratification as we move into chapter 7. So without further ado, let me tell you what they are. These three achieved statuses are very, very general, okay? Occupation, talking about your occupation level, right? You're in school right now because you want a certain occupation level. There are lots of occupations out there. Some of them have higher degrees of social respect or prestige than others. And so your occupation is an achieved status that you get through effort. And this occupation is a very general term that can cover everything from butcher and baker and candlestick maker to senator, Supreme Court justice, and president, right? Anything in between. So that's your occupation. There's a different rank for the different occupations in society, okay? So occupation is one of the three key achieved statuses you need to remember. Occupation, and I've already mentioned another one, education. And what this means is your education level. If you've just filled out the census recently, sometimes the questions ask, what is the education, the highest level of education achieved within a household? So right now you are working on your associate's degree, which is a step above the high school diploma. The high school diploma is the bare minimum required by the norms associated with U.S. culture in our society. So the education system as a social institution is designed to provide that K through 12 education for everybody in the United States. Now, not everybody gets it, right? I didn't graduate from high school, so there's something called a GED that you can get as like a catch-all for somebody who maybe slipped through the gaps and didn't actually do it the, watch my air quotes, normal way, right? You can get a GED to complete that education. You're getting an Associate of Arts or Associate of Science or Associate of Applied Science and Culinary Arts or whatever it is degree plan that you're in. That's going to be your education level, your credential, which is going to give you access to a different set of occupations than simply your high school diploma, or definitely a high school dropout would have access to. So your education level is linked to your occupation availability because of the credential that you earn or don't earn through your educational career. Now, this next one, people often confuse this next one with this class concept down over here. And stop right now if you do, because they are not directly linked. There might be a zigzag line that links them to a certain extent, but don't think of them as directly linked. This last one is income. Occupation, education, income. Your income, of course, is the amount of salary, the amount of stipends, the amount of money that you collect on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. And how much money do you have access to resource-wise? Do you have valuable items that bring in money, say a rental house, or do you use your lawnmower in order to collect money from your neighbors when you do their grass for them, for instance? So income, of course, can range from really high to really low, and typically the idea is that the higher your education level, the better your occupation is going to be, because you're going to be qualified to do a wider variety of occupations that are desirable in society. And why are they desirable in society? Because they give you a higher income. And what does a higher income give you? More resources in the household. And all of these things are linked together to make something that I am jumping ahead of myself. The reason I am hesitating right now, I'm jumping ahead to chapter 7, but we have something called a socioeconomic status. You don't even have to write that down right now because we're going to talk about it a lot in chapter 7. But your socioeconomic status, hear that word status there, is a combination of what is your education level, therefore what occupations are you qualified to do, and how much income can come from, how much income do you derive from the occupation that you hold in society. So these three things are really, really important in a future definition of a concept that's going to be vital for your understanding of chapter 7. Okay? So education, occupation, and income. Think of those three things together. They are really key achieved statuses, not only in the United States, but globally. Okay, so keep that in mind. I need to, I guess, erase some of them. How about if I just erase this over here to talk about the third type of status that I mentioned, that there's three types of statuses that we're going to be talking about in the rest of this lecture. So we have two types of statuses on the board, a scribe status and a chief status. But there's another concept that's it lets us have kind of a philosophical discussion. I wish I was in the classroom with you right now so that we could do this, but maybe you can post your questions and comments and ideas on the discussion board or text me about them. But here's the concept: master status. Master status is our third type of status that I want to talk about today. So master in this context means it controls, or it's the most important, it is seen as the most important social position that you occupy. Okay? So listen to the way I phrased that. It is seen as the most important or the most significant social position that you yourself occupies. So rewind it again and listen to the way I put that, because I put it in a certain way so that I can ask you this question and you will pause really before you answer. Remember, we're talking about statuses and roles here. And statuses and roles in that original picture where I had those circles that are intertwined, we had social institutions on one side, statuses and roles in the middle, that's kind of like the glue that keeps social institutions and social groups together. So remember, statuses and roles is kind of like the bridge between macro and micro. So master status, the position in society that is seen as the most important position that an individual holds. My question is, who gets to decide that? The individual on the micro side, or the society, the norms of society on the macro side. It's an interesting kind of thing to think about. Please don't jump to your answer right now. But this is a type of sociological concept that is a bridge between macro and micro. So what's the answer here? You might want to say, well, it's me, it's the individual. I decide what my most important position is in my life. But let me ask you, are you making that decision 100% on your own, or are you guided by macro scale social forces, patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, or social facts that exist on the macro scale that affect our life experiences on the micro scale, control to a certain extent our life experiences on the micro scale? Think about this for just a second. I've erased the examples that I had for ascribed status, but let me put one up on the board again. Somebody's sex category. Globally, when you compare countries of the world, and there are all different cultures in all different countries of the world, globally, your sex category, particularly, let's break it down even further, if you hold the ascribed status of female, most countries in the world see female and the role associated with childbirth and child rearing with the female sex. Most cultures in the world look at that ascribed status as your master status. Countries in like the United States and other high-income nations, like we will study in Chapter 8, high-income nations like the United States, master status is usually seen as that socioeconomic level, the combination of these things over here that we talked about. So, let me ask you again. If you are female, maybe you want your education level, your occupation to be the thing that people think about you the most. But let's examine some life experiences. I'll tell you about some that I've had when I was your age. Often when I would talk to people when I was in my 20s and I was in college, they would ask me, what am I doing with my life? I would say, well, I'm a student, and it would come to the question very, very soon, second or third in line from the student question, was I dating anybody? Was I married? Was anybody serious? And when was I going to have children? Even in our society, now granted this was 25 years ago and or longer when I was in your shoes, you young women in my classes, so I'm not sure if you have that same life experience as I have experienced myself, but something about our marital status and our reproductive duties, listen to me when I say duties, something about those reproductive duties has to do with the questions that we get, or the general interest, so to speak, that we get from folks when we're having casual conversations with them, especially when you're 19, 24, somewhere in there. I'm really not sure whether males get that question, not being a male myself, not having any brothers, but you guys in this class can tell me whether people have, do they get around to asking whether you're going to have any children and when you're going to get married and when you're going to make me a grandma and stuff like that. Maybe guys get the same question just as often. But I'm going to bet, with my unscientific data collection that I've done over the years, that probably more female students get the reproductive kinds of questions than male students do. Probably male students will probably get deeper questions about what kind of field they're going into in education, what kind of occupation they want to do when they get out. And typically income is something that's maybe a little bit impolite to discuss, but you can derive, you can glean, you can suppose a lot of information about future income from the kind of education that people say they are trying to get for themselves and the kind of occupation that they have as their achieved status goal moving forward. And in a country, a high income nation such as the United States, socioeconomic status, or occupation, education, and income combined typically is seen as the master status of the individual. But within that master status of the individual, female and male affect the kinds of jobs, the kinds of education, the kinds of interests that female students and male students are propelled toward. The trajectory of their career fields tend to be guided by maybe well-meaning individuals, but males tend to be pushed, until very recently, more males tend to be pushed into what we call the STEM fields. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Take that S off the end. STEM fields. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The income level for education in these fields is much higher because it's, well, I don't know why, it's favored. It is a more respectable occupation. It's seen as more difficult to get, more rigorous perhaps, whereas occupations in the humanities, unfortunately, social work, sociology teacher, and those kinds of things are seen as less rigorous, less strenuous, less challenging to get. Perhaps that's part of the reason why they are not as prestigious as STEM careers. So the income level is lower for those kinds of jobs. And so there, in the past, you can look at statistics for people who graduated with STEM fields, and it was overwhelmingly males who went into STEM fields and graduated in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. Nowadays, you see a huge push for more females to go into there, so you're seeing those statistics even out a little bit. Governor Hutchinson in Arkansas, one of the things that he ran on the first time he was up for governor was, I'm going to push STEM education for girls and computer programming in the classroom and all this kind of stuff. We have a women in STEM field branch at UAPTC that faculty members in the STEM fields, female faculty members in the STEM fields, recruit additional female students to follow in their footsteps. And this push in recent decades will probably even out a little bit of the inequality in occupation, education, and income between males and females in our society over the long haul. However, I predict, just based on past experience, not based on really, unbiased data collection in a purely research method, a pure research method that I've designed so that it's not biased. So this is just Ms. Terrell supposing that master status for females is still going to be that homemaker, that idea that, okay, she's focusing on being a pediatrician right now or being a dentist right now, but as soon as she gets married and has a kid, the expectation, the social expectation is that mama will be the master status and worker will be the secondary status. So just some more food for thought about this master status idea and the male-female overlap here in master status. This is a true story. It's been about 10 years ago, but I had a student who was in school on the GI Bill, a male student, and he was getting his degree, and he had been in the original Iraq War years ago, and so that's where he did his service. And while he was overseas, his wife was here with their kids working. She got her degree and she was working, and when he came back, he was the stay-at-home dad. And stay-at-home dad is maybe not a phrase that rolls off our lips very, very easily, and maybe that's because of these biases that we can still notice about master status and males and females in even our high-income country. But he mentioned that when he came home, he went to school and his wife worked full-time and he was a stay-at-home dad, and his name, which was a really guy name, you can't confuse it for maybe being a male or a female's name. his name was listed with the school nurse on the school records as being the primary contact. His wife's name was listed nowhere. Her phone number was listed nowhere. But he chuckled to the class when he told them that among their 4 kids who were school age, whenever there was a sniffle or any reason that they would need to go home for care, the nurse, the principal, the teacher, whoever looked for the contact information would see his name there and the phone number and ask the child for their mother's phone number, and they would call the mother instead of the father who was listed on the school records as the primary contact. You know, he laughed. He said, in my life, I see this bias about females being caregiver and parent as like the master status, and a male being breadwinner and outside of the house as a master status within that family social institution. So, you know, think about that. He laughed about it. He said it happened multiple times, and he would ask the kids, why did they call your mother? And they're like, I don't know. They asked me for mom's phone number, you know, so I gave it to them. So anyway, read chapter 4 about statuses and roles. There are a lot of vocabulary words and concepts about how life can change. The expectations for education, occupation, and income can change over time. The expectation for mom, dad, and the duties associated with that can change over time. And other achieved and ascribed statuses can have changing expectations over time. So there's a whole bunch of different vocabulary about role exit, role performance, role conflict, role strain, keep on going, role set. There's a whole bunch of different vocabulary words in chapter 4 that you need to be familiar with because they have slightly different, you know, definitions for what they're referring to, but you're going to need to get them straight when you're answering questions on Project 2 and also on the midterm exam that's coming up in about 3 weeks. So please text me with questions, post those questions on the discussion board. Make sure I don't neglect the discussion board. This is a new thing for me too. Since it's a face-to-face class, I'm not used to doing this virtual stuff for everybody. So anyway, text me whenever you need anything, and I will see you in our next video. Bye.